And our passage, our decision to be open, our decision to discover what is nourishing and to bring that back, that each individual time we fall into that yellow zone, it gives us more information about how to become more resilient. In other words, you return with more skills than you left. That without the yellow zone, without that journey, we don't have the skills. We don't know how to nourish. So it kind of switches it around, and it makes this a very creative and necessary process. And I think, again, that can be a restorative view in itself, that going through something as simple as just being hugely embarrassed after having felt like you made a fool of yourself. Instead of covering that up, it's like, how do we learn how human that is? And as teachers, how do we use our own stories of the yellow light? So I was reminded recently of the story I told of falling. And I don't know if any of you remember that story, if you ever heard that story, but I was reminded of it partially because when I was in Hamburg, I fell down and broke my arm. Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and I had to give a talk at 7 p.m. And I was in the hospital with a broken arm and blooding stitches on my face. But there again, as teachers, you could use something like that. That's a very powerful image, like falling, stumbling on the sidewalk and falling down is a yellow light experience, captured. And so just to kind of bring that back to you, there's 3 stories of falling down, and each one of them has a slightly different restorative aspect to it. The first falling down, this isn't the first time I ever fell down, but I was in Paris by myself, and I stumbled and fell on the sidewalk. I think I had jet lag, and I stumbled and fell on the sidewalk. And I was surrounded by people, and this isn't any criticism of Paris, it's just how it was. People just kind of looked down their noses at me. And I was super embarrassed, and I kind of got up, and nobody helped me or anything. I just sort of picked myself up and brushed myself off and started walking down the sidewalk. But the point is how I felt, which is I felt like a total idiot. I felt completely embarrassed. And the whole rest of the day, whenever my mind went back to it, I went back to a sense of humiliation, a sense of self-denigration. It's like I had, the mirror that I saw in other people was toxic. The second falling down experience, which happened here in near where I live, I was walking across the street and I fell down. And in front of the traffic was stopped, but there was one of these really big black trucks that I always associate with like angry macho men. It was like a big Rom truck, But here I was just kind of getting myself off the road, and out of this truck comes this man who's running up to me saying, "Can I help you?" And I was so blown away, mainly because my own projection was completely changed by this soft, kind, gentle man that came out of this big black truck. And that when he said, "Can I help you?" it was like my fall became less embarrassing. And I found that and I didn't hurt myself, but I found that the rest of the day, whenever my mind went back to it, it was joined with his kindness. And so the embarrassment and the kindness were mixed together. Does that make sense? And then this last fall I had in Hamburg, it was even more so because whenever somebody asked me about my fall, I broke my arm, I cut my face, but the only thing I remember is the ambulance, the hospital, everything was so loving and compassionate that strangely, it's like a positive memory. Um, and so I realized that in this case, the injury of the fall was completely mitigated by the compassion. So anyway, I'm using my fall as an image of the yellow light because when you're falling, you just go right into that. I don't know where this is going. And, a broken arm is really an unpleasant experience. I'll tell you, even now, it can barely move. But to have that experience joined with compassion is such a restorative experience that you actually come out of it with a much different level of confidence in your own goodness and a willingness to be more vulnerable and less defensive. So that's just an example of how I think in teaching the yellow light, using some experience that you've had, and I use the narrative of the hero's journey, but it doesn't have to be um, sort of an abstract heroic. It's really, how does my personal experience of being embarrassed or shocked or falling into uncertainty, how has that led to an outcome based on the restorative kindness and support of others, and how can I give that to myself so that I can be there for someone else? That's kind of the framing of that question.